Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this, the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And if you want to keep up with all things Clown Decade, do subscribe to the channel and become a member. And today we are going through what I have now termed an astroist, might pick up, might not, who knows, who is an activist who is effectively paid to be an activist, and quite a lot of them are relatively obvious. I'm talking about your Gary Stevensons, your Greta Thunbergs, and half of BreadTube. People who, it's now been confirmed with BreadTube at the very least, are quite clearly paid to put out content, appear on panel shows, effectively give the regime line, if you will. Obviously the most obvious one was going on about climate change for years, and immigration is another one, which Zoe Gardner here is the subject of today. And I'm just going to touch on a very good thread by CT here, explaining how every time immigration becomes a core issue of the day, Zoe Gardner is trotted out into the news to parrot all the usual talking points about how we can't stop asylum seekers from coming here, we need immigrants, and the critics of these things are just racist. I nearly said Islamophobes. Xenophobes is the usual line, and she's referred to as an immigration expert, and you can go through the thread yourself, it's a very good one. But the main point is that she did a degree at King's College London in Spanish and Modern Greek, moved on to a master's in comparative politics, nationalism and ethnicity from London School of Economics, and she eventually returned to London School of Economics a few years after finishing her Masters to start a part-time PhD on immigration control at the EU's external borders. And she dropped out of the programme after 2 years and 4 months, and there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that she actually completed the programme. And effectively, long story short, the suspicion from an awful lot of people is that she dropped out of this effectively because she was paid to be a full-time activist, and doing a PhD but not completing it was good enough to call her a migration expert. So she's pulled out every time to defend immigration, and we're going to go through a few clips of her defending immigration and, go through the poor argumentation she puts forward, because at the end of the day, like an awful lot of people who are trotted out, they are not trotted out to think dynamically, they are trotted out to effectively push their sophistry. And given that immigration's been bigger than news for years, but now we've got the one in, one out plan with France coming into play from Keir Starmer, which is just a terrible plan, we may as well look at, what the astroists are talking about here. So, firstly, there was a tweet where she posted an East Anglia Bylines article with Zoe saying, "What's it like to be an asylum seeker inside a hotel where racist mobs chant for your removal outside? What will it take for the frightened children to recover from this and be able to feel safe and at home in this country, which will be their home?" Yeah, really not helping with the "we're totally not replacing the Brits" arguments, are they? The scale of violent misogynistic racism on display by paid-for fakers and bots on here has increased dramatically lately. The silent majority in the UK are decent people who want a well-functioning and humane immigration system. Yes, but that is the opposite of what you want, which is being drowned out by racists and ignored by politicians. Again, Zoe's the type of person who has to constantly be reminded that the voting intentions by people for decades, literally decades, going all the way back to the 50s, was for less immigration, and obviously for there to be no illegals whatsoever. That's been the common thread throughout all this, and she is as I say, paid for and bought activist who is put forward as an expert because she dropped out of a PhD. It's ridiculous. The article itself was doing the relatively typical thing of, oh, well, these people will claim that they're not racist and that they're okay with some valid asylum claim, but then some idiots are chanting war or death while others are chanting F migrants, F them, they're all illegal and they're all paedophiles. According to the left, this isn't peaceful resistance, but of course breaking into Bryce Norton to do millions of pounds worth of damage to military aircraft there is of course completely peaceful protest. And that in fact, don't you know that 35% of doctors are foreign born and 27% of nurses are from outside the UK. This, of course, while there are famously, recruitment issues in the United Kingdom for, Brits who have done medicine, Brits who have done nursing. They're struggling to find jobs within the NHS. And there's a whole issue that I can go into on recruiting there, but I don't want to get into it. The point is that, this is Zoe's version of impressive journalism. Zoe didn't write the article, she's just sharing it, but she is impressed with the basic talking points of, oh, don't you know that the NHS relies on migrants to work. This, of course, ignoring the fact that also this is a service that an awful lot of people in the UK use who are foreign-born too. So if you got rid of the 27% of nurses, the 35% of doctors, and the 30-odd% of foreign-born people in the UK, yeah, you probably wouldn't actually see that much difference in the way the NHS is run. But anyway, there's idiots at all these protests. I don't think it's fair to paint them all like this, just like I don't necessarily think it's fair to paint all the pro-Palestine protesters as terrorist sympathisers. It's obviously the people who are openly sympathising with terrorists who should be counted among that. Anyway, as mentioned before, when Zoe isn't on Twitter defending all this, she's rolled out onto Sky News and such to defend immigration. So we're going through a few clips of that. Take it away, Zoe.
Maybe there should be a moratorium, for example, on asylum claims while we sort through this backlog.
Well, I'm afraid that's just not realistic, because if you say we're not going to process any more claims...
Why is it not realistic?
Well, people just need to find protection. They do. We've seen the horrors that are taking place in the Middle East, in Sudan, in Eritrea.
Yeah, but one of the biggest groups who came over last year was Albanian. A load of Vietnamese are coming over as well. You know, you can say, oh, look at some of these particular areas. I don't know, Afghanistan was a big one as well. You know, Pakistan and India started having a bit of fighting months ago as well. Doesn't mean you need to open your doors to them, obviously. But again, if the main people coming over are Albanian, you know, Vietnamese, Afghanistanis, which frankly there's no excuse for them to come over the channel, 100,000 of them are coming over secretly via government evacuation, it just doesn't hold water. People need protection also doesn't particularly work when they're all coming over from France, but this is a point that's been done to death. But it's good to see that Sky News are actually turning a bit right-wing recently. What seems to have happened is that the Tories have left office, Labour have gone in charge, and people have realised, oh, the Tories actually weren't in charge, and now we have to have a go at these people because they're crazy. We thought they were right about the Tories.
These are the key countries people are coming from. The UK has a colonial history. That means that we have ties with countries all over the world. We will always be a destination for immigration, and we have an ageing population that needs immigration.
Again, just classic talking points that have not changed at all, despite the fact that they really do not hold water with very many people these days. Oh, we were a colonial empire, what, a century ago, at least? We have the Commonwealth since then. We have crazy laws that allow Indians to come over and vote day one they're here. We do not have the same thing going back over to India. Come on. Obviously, we can't keep this one-way street going. On top of that, you know, the historical context of colonialism and all that, and the East India Company, etc., etc., etc. I mean, at what point in time were we allowed to move past that? I would say way back after it was dissolved anyway. I'd say maybe give it a good decade after India was independent, but no, we've got to stop, we've got to keep bringing that up and say, yeah, open borders for all, actually, because we were a very advanced economy, by the way, which did actually help out all of these colonies on top of that. Plus the whole ageing population thing, blah, blah, blah. If that was true, we'd only have useful people coming over, but we don't. We know that we have hundreds of thousands of economically inactive people being brought over as dependents, or hell, even on visas that are obviously there as a scam. Come over on a charity visa, get lost in the system, stay here forever after 5 years. It's a common one. We have crazy immigration laws and people want them to change. Learning nonsense in a PhD does not make you an expert on this. All it does is stop you thinking dynamically and falling back on these easy answers, which aren't easy answers, because you don't have any answers to the questions with the problems that they bring up.
So it's not realistic to say...
Well, no, but I'm only saying we also are a democracy, and I think it's pretty clear through polling that people are not terribly happy with the levels of illegal and indeed legal migration. They want to see lower numbers, and surely in a democracy, the rights of what people want needs to be respected too.
We do need to actually discuss this vibe shift here, because Sky News, quite famously, is quite a left-wing news organisation in the United Kingdom, like a lot of them are, to be fair, but this interviewer is interviewing like he's on GB News 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when Sky News was still very much, Tories are bad, immigration's great, basically sounding like Zoe Gardner, if they ever got Priti Patel or someone like that on. But now the tables have turned, this is how badly Labour have screwed up, frankly. The illusion's over. You do not have the EU to blame anymore. You do not have the Tories to blame anymore. These people have got what they've wanted. and the whole illusion is smashing before our eyes. I'm not joking when I say this. There are probably going to be more pro-reform people in the media in the coming years who are BBC, who were Sky News, who are Channel 4, things like that, because, frankly, it's clear they're professionalising, and quite clearly, all the leftist assumptions we've been riding on for decades have collapsed. It's kind of amazing how they've collapsed within a year. And people like Zoe Gardner, quite thankfully really, this is a bit more of a white pill than I thought, they're kind of brought on as weirdos. What do you mean we can't close the border? We're in a democracy. People have been voting for this for 14 years at least, don't you know? It's kind of amazing to see. Honestly, I'm quite happy to see this. I thought I'd be getting well more annoyed.
Sure. I mean, we can all vote for the tide to stop coming in, and it will continue to come in.
So
what we can do...
You're suggesting the state will not have the ability to control
what the state has the ability to do...
I hope you see what I mean by this with this Sky News reporter. Literally having to ask, are you saying that the state has absolutely no control whatsoever over its border? Are you unironically saying that, Miss Gardner? Because ultimately that's the assumption she has been going with for years, probably because her PhD was looking into a European future with migration as a focus. What did the European Union have? Open borders. So in her mind, no, there's no such thing as borders. And she literally cannot think dynamically on top of that. She's not expanded her mind since going to university, which is a problem a lot of people have, by the way.
Is to manage the arrival of asylum seekers through regulated routes and to integrate them well into our economy and to help them and support them to become good members of our society. That is what the state has the ability to do.
No, the state doesn't actually have the ability to integrate them. They've been trying that for years. There's literally thousands, hundreds of thousands, some people might even say millions of people who have been here for literally decades and not managed to integrate. There's entire areas of the UK where English is not spoken in public. And that's not via illegal migration, by the way. That is completely legal migration. Not necessarily refugees, but that doesn't matter. What we're talking about here is the fact that there are effectively places where British law is not applied properly. People are fed up with that. People want that fixed. People want immigrants who do not abide by the law and have been living effectively under a different enclave system that is completely at odds with the British way of life, gone. I wanted to be very particular there because it's been pointed out to me actually in recent articles that we've had kind of Chinese enclaves in a few cities for decades, and there's no doubts that people will have had issues with this over the years, but you don't exactly see the anti-migrant types, even the most radical, complaining about Chinatowns. And I think it's always worth going into details like that.
What the state doesn't have the ability to do is to conjure up a workforce of working age people out of the existing population in the UK. We just don't have that.
We do, actually. It's called automation. Every time that happens, there's an unemployment problem because obviously people are automated out of jobs. But we're now in a position where we actually need automation, and basically every piece of legislation we have in place is there to stifle the automation. And it's even been pointed out by many people now that automatic car washes that used to be next to petrol stations, you seem to see less and less of them because there's an awful lot of, let's face it, migrants who are doing hand car wash work. And it's an example of actually reversing on automation that's obviously more economically viable in the long term, but obviously short term, get cheap people in to do the hand car washes. They're all immigrants, so you can pay them under minimum wage and none of them will complain. Is that something that Zoe Gardner's ever heard of? Yes, but she'll probably just say, oh, well, you see, we need a workforce. Look at the immigrants working. No, you can have automatic car washes.
And what the state doesn't have the ability to do, as we have seen by decades of failed and incredibly expensive efforts to do so, is to prevent people who are desperate from reaching our shores and seeking protection.
Again, what are they actually desperate for? Why are they going from France to Britain? They're desperate for the accommodation, the food that's cooked for them, the freedom to leave their hotel room. God, I heard an anecdote from someone in the Discord yesterday who saw someone he assumed was an illegal migrant in, new tracksuits, new trainers, and he hopped a underground barrier. Why did they come here? Because to them, effectively, they are paid to live in an anarchic Britain. They're literally paid to do that effectively. Oh, they only get 50 quid a week. Would you survive on that? If I was getting my washing done, my bedding done, was having my food prepared and given to me for free, yeah, I probably would be happy with 50 quid of my own money a week, actually. Are you kidding me? Of course you can make that work. And on top of that, they work illegally in Deliveroo and things like that because there's no regulation on that. Or in the car washes, like I said before. Again, even the food delivery, that can be done automatically by drones, but it's not being done because it's all stifled.
The state could do what President Trump has attempted to do, and indeed not just there, other countries as well, either through incentives. I mean, Denmark and Sweden, for example, offer money for people to return home or to go somewhere else.
I'm not being funny, but these points, literally these points are of the alt-right circa 2016. You know, I saw this from Patriotic Alternative, Generation Identity. These identitarian groups making this point pay people to go back. Hell, it was an Enoch Powell Rivers of Blood point. Sorry, it's Birmingham speech point. You pay people to go back if they want to. You know, there are prisoners who are foreign-born writing to Nigel Farage effectively begging him to deport them. And we're at a point where we make it literally impossible to deport them, and Zoe Gardner is part of that system by effectively throwing out all of this absolute nonsense to people that are now Enoch Powell posting on Sky News. You have literal Sky News journalists making Enoch Powell's point and having other countries' examples to follow that are way to the right of our current immigration system, and you're blackpilled. This is a way more white-pilling video than I thought. Clown Decade might not last till the end of the decade at this rate, you never know.
I am absolutely in favour of bold and radical action to fundamentally change the failed way in which we're trying to manage this issue. In fact, we're not trying to manage this issue because there are plenty of corporations that are selling us drones. We have hundreds of drones patrolling the channel. We have private security firms patrolling the beaches in France and the coast along the UK. We have...
Is any of that stuff true? How are you getting through thousands of people a day pretty much, well, on the good days, if you have all this apparent security in place? It's the funny thing about the Rwanda scheme, that started to work. Before we even knew if it would be workable, you already had an uptick in people trying to cross over quickly and then people trying to move over to Ireland because they thought the Rwanda plan was really bad for the illegal migrants. Dominic Cummings can say what he wants, the Rwanda plan was not bad and I've always been a defender of it. And ultimately, it's not too different to what Reform wants anyway. All it really means is if you come over illegally, you will be sent to Rwanda and stay there. Reform's plan is, well, either send them to a third country or send them back to where they came from. Doesn't really matter.
Paid for infrared cameras to scan lorries and trucks. None of it works, but it makes...
Sorry, the scanning of lorries and trucks absolutely did work. That's why they moved over to boats. We literally started spot-checking lorries for illegal migrants, and they moved over to boats, and thousands come a day on them now. What do you mean it didn't work? That's what I mean by she can't think dynamically. She will have studied all this when we had the illegals coming over on lorries problem back when we were in the EU. And her mind is literally not expanded from there.
One portion of the country, very, very, very rich, right? And in the meantime, it creates a permanent scapegoat of these people who are, let's be serious, a drop in the ocean, 25,000 people, 25,000 too many people crossing on boats, in my opinion, but it is a drop in the ocean. It's barely 3% of what we're looking at of immigration to the country as a whole.
The conversation's also about immigration as a whole, though. That's why there was a whole pay people to go back home if they want to scheme that Sweden and Denmark have. But on top of that, these billionaires? Yeah, these billionaires are the problem. Meanwhile, just over the weekend, we've had news that a 10-year-old was attempted to be kidnapped in Manchester, and then in Warwickshire, the Reform Council leader had to spend days chasing the police to try and find out information about a 12-year-old girl that was raped by 2 Afghani refugees who came over on boats. Say what you will about billionaires, but I've never heard of them literally taking kids off the streets to take them back to their home to rape them. And in fact, when they are caught doing things like that, like Hugh Edwards of the BBC, he gets a slap on the wrist and everyone hates the BBC and the justice system for that. Okay, is that every migrant? Is that every refugee? No, obviously it isn't. But it is a very, very, very deep and current issue that people feel it's very unfair that, veterans and single mothers are being kicked out for these people. That is happening in general. The rapes, sure, they aren't, but they're a very good thing to point to and say, can you please stop covering this up? I kind of care about 12-year-old girls getting raped.
But they can be targeted as a lightning rod of hatred. So I totally agree. Radical change is absolutely needed. Okay. What I don't agree with is denying people their rights and denying reality.
Yeah, you get the idea at that point. You need to completely get rid of the asylum system as it exists now. You know, to me and a lot of reformers, yay. Oh, but to replace it with an open border system. Boo. I don't think there's really any left-winger who's pushing for this these days either. I think that's why Sky News have gone completely against this, because it's quite hard to say we haven't had open borders for the last few decades, given that 1 million came over in the Boris wave. Plus hundreds of thousands came over secretly under Tory rule as well with the Afghan scheme, which your low-information voter says, oh, that's good, we were saving Afghanistanis, but when you point out actually that they weren't vetted and we had some sexual offenders come over on that scheme as well, their mind changes quite quickly. Anyway, over to LBC, where Ben Kentish is on with Zoe Gardner yet again to talk about the one-in, one-out policy we have with France.
It gets one very basic thing right, which is to acknowledge that there's no feasible way of cooperating with France in order to prevent small boats crossings.
Damn, you're right there. Again, this is a reform point. The problem with Zoe is that her solution is, oh, just open the border. Make them all legal.
Without recognising that we need to play our role and take our fair share of people from France too, right? Because the French just simply aren't going to agree to a deal.
Yeah, that's why the plan for reform is to basically circumvent all that. You know, you got Lee Anderson basically saying send them back anyway, it's France's problem, we pay them to not let this happen, therefore any failures they need to take on their own shoulders. And those we don't turn back in the channel, we detain and deport to a third country or back where they came from. Doesn't really matter. Oh, can't do that. International treaty. Sorry, if they come over and break our laws, they've actually broken the refugee convention anyway, so yeah, we can actually send them back.
Where it's like, no, you just deal with everything and we deal with nothing.
Yeah, that's kind of the point. If they're leaving the French country to come over to the British country, it's not our problem, literally. They should be dealing with them. The onus should not be on us. And, you know, this is a problem with the EU as a whole. They didn't really know what to do about the big refugee crisis after Angela Merkel opened the doors to Syria, and so they said, oh, you got to spread them out all over the place. They didn't do that very well, and so they've all basically gone to the countries that treat them best, which happens obviously to be Britain, among with a couple of others. And there's unlimited funds for this as well. And open the border, it just fixes itself. Just a crazy woman.
On the other hand, the one-in, one-out part just doesn't work, because if your safe route to come to the UK is dependent on somebody else risking their life in the Channel and then being detained and returned again, then, well, essentially, as soon as it starts to work and people don't go in the Channel, in theory, well, then there's no more places on the safe route.
Oh, good. This isn't going to work anyway, so it doesn't really matter. You know, they're taking 50 people a week. We get thousands a week. Not going to work, obviously. I know that's just during the pilot scheme times, but it's just going to be a bit of a disaster. And again, has there been a spike in people coming over? Only when the weather's good. It's not like it was with the Rwanda scheme. The people smugglers aren't worried about this one. The Rwanda scheme was going to work, and that's why they've been open about saying, okay, maybe we need a third country again. They had one ready to go, but they got rid of it. Because the left wing a year ago were basically open borders everywhere, and these days, as we saw on Sky News, and even as we're seeing in the mainstream, okay, maybe democracy actually needs to be implemented on this topic. Yeah, I think you're right there. Anyway, she also appeared on the BBC, and even the BBC were saying, why are you going crazy open borders? What's wrong with you?
It's quite frustrating watching it happen, isn't it? Because everybody agrees we need to stop the boats, and the politicians say they'll spend any amount of money on it, and they'll do anything at all, but they won't do that one thing, will they? That one thing that we all know, the evidence shows us, will actually make a serious difference on this. And that is to provide people with a real alternative way of making it to the UK.
I can tell you now, a lot of my listeners do not agree with that. They say we've already welcomed sufficient numbers of people from around the world. We don't need to start welcoming any more.
And there's no argument against this that she has, really. Or the problem is in her mind, it's I'm the expert on this, people should listen to me. Just declaring that we all know that opening the borders will be the answer to all this has to be correct because I learned it at university during a PhD and I'm paid to say this, therefore it's correct. And yeah, people are just going to reject it. Anyway, go on, let's have a quick listen to what she says. If she starts saying the same thing, I'm just skipping it.
I think that there is a huge opposition to people arriving on small boats through these irregular means, right? I absolutely see that. That is 100% true. But what I'm pointing out is that we didn't have the same, and we don't have the same objection to Ukrainians. Because why? We gave them a safe route to come here, and we supported them so that they could live and be part of our communities. We didn't see any objection whatsoever to Hong Kongers coming here, even though, as I say, 180,000 people came over the course of a couple of years.
There was a little bit of pushback against Hong Kongers, but this is the whole thing. Why were people happy with Ukrainians coming over? Because it was mainly women and children, and of those women and children, they did try to some level integrate. The main problem, actually, that they had was from leftists who were basically saying, oh, they're all racist because they just don't understand why there are so many non-white people here, which is just hilarious to think about. And then when it came to Hong Kongers, I actually know, I've heard quite a few anecdotes of people effectively saying, well, they stay out of the way, they get involved. You know, many of them I know through priests I know in churches, because a lot of them wanted to convert to Christianity, Catholicism specifically, and they couldn't where they were. And they're very appreciative of it. It's totally reasonable to point out that, yeah, there are better fits here than others. The problem with an awful lot of the boat people is that an awful lot of them are not a good fit. Hence, we don't have safe and legal routes for them. Hence, they either need to find an alternative life to live, or if they're proper refugees, find an alternative country. Because, yeah, we want to be very selective on it.
Why do we not have any objection to that? Because it wasn't built up in the media as a problem, because they came along on a safe route, and because they were supported when they arrived.
Sorry, but you cannot say that the people in hotels aren't supported. You can't say that. They're making problems, that is the thing. And people have never voted to let over 100,000 Afghanistanis. You know, they voted to let over a few. I don't think people have too much of a problem with those that actually fought with Brits. For some reason, whatever, that's the general consensus. But when I tell people the vast majority of the Afghans who came over were not fighting with us, and were effectively just on a list that wasn't even a list of people who necessarily fought with us, they say, oh, that doesn't sound good. Yeah, correct. Anyway, as mentioned before, she doesn't have a dynamic mind, so she just ends up falling back on the same thing over and over again. But if she's not on a panel, as you notice from that clip, she has her own TikTok. Sometimes, clearly, she records herself on these panels, and other times, she just has a go at people who are commenting on her videos.
On the one hand, mate, you're right. I'm not affected by people arriving in the UK on small boats. And neither are you.
Okay, but there was an attempted kidnap of a 10-year-old back in July, and a 12-year-old girl was raped back in July as well. In Epping, there's a constant protest going on because a 14-year-old girl was sexually assaulted by a boat person as well. You know, me personally, am I affected? No, not particularly, but I moved out of areas that are now affected. And this is a problem that keeps boiling and boiling and boiling up. And your answer to that is, well, you see, if they were legal, no one would have a problem. No, I think people would have a problem with legal migrants raping. I'm going to be honest with you.
Grand total of all the people who've ever come to the UK in a small boat is 136,350.
I mean, I suppose I don't know exactly when this clip was made, but I know as of July 2025, the number's actually above 170,000, so if she made this recently, that does not bode well on her. Because after all, I got this clip from Twitter, and I frankly do not believe she was making this content over a year ago when that figure will have been much more accurate.
We have a population of nearly 67 million people. That is 0.2% of the population. None of us are really affected by this.
Again, it's this not being able to think dynamically problem that I'm seeing, not just with the left, I'm seeing it a lot with the right too, but there's probably going to be a little series on that, so look forward to it. The British population, by the way, was about 67 million in 2021, 22, something like that. It's now pretty much touching 70 million people, which actually does help her case with the whole, oh, it's a really small percentage of the population, but at the end of the day, if a very small subsection of people are causing quite a lot of problems and people feel like they are paying for something they never wanted to pay for with their tax money, yeah, people aren't going to really care for all this detail about numbers. It doesn't matter. Any number of people they don't feel like they should be paying for is going to be a problem for your average person and voter. Hence reform of 30-odd% in the polls.
on the other hand, yes, we are affected, and yes, I am affected too. And that's because ever since 2018, the government has acted like this is the most important thing that's happening in the country.
No, they haven't. The Tories tried to shut it up for ages. In fact, Nigel Farage in 2018 was the person on GB News in a boat out in the English Channel saying, look at all these people coming over, nothing's being done about it, here's a 4-star hotel. That was in 2018. They were trying to cover it up, but they couldn't thanks to GB News. And it only really became a big political issue in, well, post-COVID, arguably. It was something that was massively, massively ignored by the mainstream up until, yeah, the 2020s, really. Because like everything, they were trying to cover it up before that. And they had the Rwanda plan, which, you know, honestly was a pretty good plan, and kept running into problems because they couldn't legally do anything about it because they didn't bother changing laws, and that's why you got people getting fed up and then voting in Labour. Who scrapped the plan, but that's because ultimately when it came to immigration, people didn't generally feel like the Tories deserved their vote and to be trusted with that, so they just rolled the dice with Labour knowing that they were loaded to be low, but, well, hopefully they wouldn't destroy the economy. They've destroyed the economy and now Reform are right up there in the 30s.
And they've done that because that gets them the votes of people like you.
Sorry, but it was a complete failure that lost them their votes. The only people going on about the small boats and actually doing anything about it was actually Tories. Labour kept saying smash the gangs, and they kept being counter-signalled by people saying that's obviously not going to work. There was barely anybody who voted Labour because they thought they would be better on immigration. Let's be real here.
So that means they've spent all the parliamentary time, all of the political energy and capital that they have, and a hell of a lot of money on trying and failing to stop it.
Yeah, a big part of that money goes to legal fees, effectively, which is just crazy for a government to do. Government's literally in charge of laws. Why aren't they changing them if it's stopping them from implementing policy they were voted in on? It's nuts.
Because it suits them for morons like you to believe that this is actually our problem rather than rich people hoarding the resources. Politicians like Farage have made their careers out of peddling hate, and that affects me too.
Yeah, blah, blah, blah. It's the billionaires that are the problem. That's definitely what it is. There's never any pointing out, of course, that billionaires who go to the social clubs at the WEF every year, who go on about wanting open borders, there's never anything about that, obviously. They focus on about 4 billionaires in the world that exist and aren't open borders, and is basically good cover for the rest of the tens of billionaires that exist who do want open borders because it helps with their business model. It's nuts, and it's nuts that they get away with it, but that's why channels like mine exist. The funniest part is even the British establishment are falling apart when it comes to this issue because they've started getting detractors, even within the OBR, who were pushing the open borders economic model. Serious problems with the UK's reliance on migration, warns OBR official. Oh, you don't say. Let's see what he's got to say then. So, writing in an essay published by the Common Good Foundation, Mr. Miles said, immigration, which primarily involves those of working age who are many years away from retirement, both delays the impact of ageing the population and is a driver of population growth. Some concluded from this that the faster rise in population will be beneficial in alleviating acute underlying fiscal pressure. But even setting aside the fact that it is GDP per capita that matters for average standards of living, and growth in population does not obviously boost it, there are serious problems with the idea that a faster population growth can consistently alleviate fiscal problems. Wow, I've not been saying that for 8 years. Thank you, OBR, for finally catching up. Mr. Miles also suggests that tackling worklessness among working-age Britons was more important than attracting the most highly paid migrants to the UK, which we don't even do, by the way. It's something like 10% of all visas in the UK for foreigners go to high-skilled workers visas. It's a minority of the people coming over here that are actually going to be helping rather than hindering the UK and its economy, and possibly even its social fabric, because let's be real here, people actually quite like the highly skilled workers, because typically they're not the ones milling about and causing problems in, say, Rotherham. So Mr. Miles also said the fiscal benefit of raising the incomes of those who are born in the UK and who might be on a trajectory of constantly below average wages are as great as the benefit of having more people come and stay in the UK with average or especially well above average earnings. In other words, actually try and raise the wages of the British workers rather than trying to keep them pressured downward via immigration, because that's just going to help everyone, and also not going to annoy people to the point of having absolutely no trust in establishment institutions whatsoever. It comes after the OBR has faced scrutiny for overstretching the economic benefits of migration, with Morgan McSweeney, Sir Keir's Chief of Staff, reportedly concerned that the watchdog does not properly account for the burden on public services. The watchdog previously admitted that low-paid migrant workers are a drain on public purse, costing taxpayers more than $150,000 each by the time they hit state pension age. Incredible. The OBR had to literally be told, can you please adjust your model to account for the fact that migrants actually use services and don't just pay into them? That's what the OBR basically had to be told here. And once they did that, they go against Zoe Gardner. And as I say, that's what this whole video is about. She is a moron, and she is basically representing a completely dead and defunct institution that is the pro-migration, university, academic and research sector. It's dead. It's defunct. There's no point in having her anymore. That's why she was getting mad on TikTok, because your average commenter is much more aware of these issues than Zoe Gardner is. And all Zoe Gardner can do is bring out 2014 lines again and again and again and again. Anyway, I think that's good enough for the video today. So if you enjoy what I do, please do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. You can also become a member, leave a super chat or super thanks on any video or stream that I do. Speaking of streams, Tuesday, that's today, it's Tosh News. We will be on over at the Worcester Club tonight. Thursday, we have some Hollow Knight. Saturday, we have some Laughing at the Guardian, so do come along to all that. Videos out as and when I can make them. Right, with that, everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.